Are you okay with no exception for rape and incest in the state of Texas?
Well, that's a question the state legislature is going to decide.
What does Ted Cruz think?
I think it is up to the voters of Texas to decide that.
What do you
I recognize you don't like that answer, but that's my answer anyway.
I'm trying to get an answer.
I have given you an answer.
I'm joined now by Colin Allred, the Democratic nominee for the U.S. Senate in Texas. That was Ted Cruz outright refusing to discuss where he stands on the issue of abortion. What did you make of his refusal to give any semblance of a straight answer on this issue?
Well, I mean, it's inexcusable, of course. It's outrageous. But we've been seeing this for some time here in Texas. He's been refusing to answer questions from Texas journalists. And when he does answer it, he's got this attitude. But listen, this is his ban, and this is on him. He's worked towards this for over a decade. And he worked at it, very diligently to put the judges at the district court level, the circuit level, the Supreme Court level. He backed in primaries here in Texas, the most extreme candidates, often in Republican state legislative primaries, knowing that they would put these laws in place, at the state level. He called for and celebrated the Dobbs ruling, said it was a massive victory. This ban that goes way too far is on him. And now he doesn't want to talk about it. But he's going to hear from these Texas women and from Texas families on November 5th when we beat him.
What would you do if elected on the issue of women's reproductive rights?
Well, listen, this is going to be one of our first priorities. We're going to codify Roe v. Wade. And we're going to go back to the standard that we've had for the last 50 years. And I know a lot of folks around the country, this is important to them. This is more important for Texans than almost any other issue because it's impacting every aspect of our lives. 26,000 Texas women, according to the Houston Chronicle, have been forced to give birth to their rapist child since this ban came into place here. We have all of these stories, whether it's my friends Kate Cox and her husband Justin, who had to leave the state, a mother of two, because she needed to get the care she needed so she could then be able to still have a family, or Amanda Zarowski, who lost the ability to have children of her own because she was denied care so long. And these stories are just adding up. But it's also impacting our medical schools, our university systems. Our businesses are having to answer questions about it when they're trying to bring in talent from out of state. Every aspect of Texas life is going to be impacted by this because it's about freedom. And when you don't have freedom in a state or in a place, then everything else has some negative impacts. And so that's why we have to restore this right.
What stories have you heard since you've been on the campaign trail that were especially impactful in terms of, women contending with one of the most extreme abortion bans in the country, one with no exception for rape or incest?
Yeah, that's right. And no exception for the health of the mother either. And folks should know that because it's basically, a lawyer determining whether or not a woman is sick enough to get the care that they need. And, listen, I think there's a woman named Lauren Miller, who is a friend of mine. She lives not far from my wife and I here in Dallas. And she was already a mom. She got pregnant with twins. And one of the twins wasn't going to make it. And it was killing her and the other twin. And at the hospital, I was actually born in Dallas, a Presbyterian hospital. Her doctor threw up his hands and said, "You have to leave the state right now. There's nothing more I can do for you." And so as sick as she was, and she was very sick, she went to an airport here in Dallas and she flew to Colorado. She had a 15-minute procedure done by somebody she'd never met, cost her $3,000, and to save the other baby. And I met that little guy, and he's so cute. She came to the United States Senate to tell her story in front of Ted Cruz's committee, the Judiciary Committee. And he didn't show up to hear her speak. When Amanda Zarowski came to the Senate to tell her story, he didn't show up to hear her speak. He might not want to hear them in the Senate or answer questions from reporters, but I can guarantee you he's going to hear from Texans on November 5th.
Based on what you've seen from Ted Cruz, do you believe that he would sign a nationwide abortion ban into law?
Well, he's been a part of 5 different bills to ban abortion nationwide. So
I guess that answers that question.
Yeah, so we already know what he wants to do. And listen, I think that we all know that given the chance, somebody who's worked towards this for over a decade, who has celebrated the fall of Roe, who has basically made this one of his top priorities, we all know that given the chance that he will ban abortion nationwide. And this is a very real reality. So for folks who are not in Texas, who might be listening to this or watching this, understand that Ted Cruz is our problem in Texas, but he's your problem too. And when we beat him and we restore this right, it'll be for Texas women, but it'll also be to prevent him from ever doing this to all of folks all across the country.
Right. It's a great point because a nationwide abortion ban is a nationwide abortion ban. It would impact, everybody from California to Massachusetts and New York, not just people in red states. During Ted's presidential campaign, he signed a pledge to back a personhood amendment to the U.S. Constitution. What would that mean, for example, for the future of IVF?
Well, that's a great point because it would probably mean, under the most common interpretation of it, that IVF would be illegal. But also certain forms of birth control would be as well. And, I think we have to also talk about that given the chance, they might not just stop at access to abortion, they'd also come after birth control. And this is extreme stuff, but that's how extreme it is. That's what's happening here in Texas. We know that they're openly talking about tracking women's pregnancies. We have an attorney general who's requesting information from hospitals from out of state about Texas women who have traveled there to get care. We know that they're talking about saying that Texas women can't travel out of the state to get access to their care. I mean, how are they going to enforce that? They're going to start pulling Texas women over and asking them, what's the nature of your travel, ma'am? This is not freedom. And this is, there's one thing I know about us as a fourth generation Texan, is that we believe fundamentally in freedom. People come to Texas in many cases so they can get away from overbearing government. And this is big government in the most personal sense, reaching into your most personal decisions. And this is not the only place that Ted Cruz wants to control how folks behave and how they live their lives. It's a very weird impulse that he has. But it's one that he's had a career of trying to enforce his kind of narrow vision of how folks should live on them.
And are Republicans that you speak to on the campaign trail recognizing the extent to which they themselves have become the same party that they've been fear-mongering against for decades? I mean, I remember when the ACA first came into being and Republicans warned about death panels making decisions about your own health care, about what you do with your body. And now here they are, where you have Kate Cox, for example, was granted that exemption by a Texas court. Ken Paxton went and appealed it to the Texas Supreme Court, and they overruled, which would have forced Kate Cox to remain in the state and put her own health at risk. And eventually she had to flee the state. But again, like to my earlier question, like, don't they realize that the Republican Party as it stands today has become the very thing that they warned that Democrats would become?
Well, there are certainly some, and I was just with a bunch of I don't think they still call themselves Republicans or call themselves independents now in Corpus Christi yesterday. And we're talking about this exact thing, which is that there was a fundamental conservative idea is that folks should largely be left alone and to make their own decisions. And this is not it. There are so many folks who've gotten involved in this effort who were Republicans, who have come forward and started to tell their stories, or who just were kind of apolitical and who felt like maybe they voted for Republicans in the past and thought that this has now brought this home for them. I have a friend named Ryan Hamilton. He's a DJ here in Texas. I don't know what Ryan's exact politics were, but they certainly weren't. He was certainly not a Democrat when he and his wife were pregnant, and she got ill and she was sent away from the hospital and told basically to come back with the complications she was having with her pregnancy, to come back when she was sicker. And he found his wife, white as a sheet and bleeding out on his bathroom floor. And he had to rush her to an emergency room where she was still being denied care. And this is something that's for a husband is the sum of all your fears, that you wouldn't be able to help your wife in a moment of extreme like this. And then it becomes more than political. This becomes very personal. And it becomes something you say, listen, this is wrong. And you get involved and you start speaking out. And a lot of folks have heard him and other Texas families telling their stories and understood this could be them. And this is why it's so important that we restore this right.
Yeah, perfectly put. So as not to bury the lead here, you have turned what most people viewed as a completely unwinnable election into one of the closest races in the country, and that's the one in Texas here. You're polling within 3 points of Ted Cruz right now. Both Cook Political Report and Inside Elections have moved the race in your direction in their latest ratings. That race now has a lean Republican rating. That said, while 3 points is close, there is still some gap there. So how do you intend on closing that gap with just a few weeks to go until the election here?
Yeah, I mean, listen, number one, Texas is very hard to poll. So I would just say from the beginning, I think that we always come in with a certain amount of skepticism around polling. And I say that not as somebody who doesn't believe in polls in general, but just knowing my state. When I was running in 2018 against the 22-year incumbent here in Dallas, I don't think there was ever a poll that showed me leading, and I beat him by 7 points. But that being said, what we have been in the process of is introducing me in a state with 30 million people, with over 20 different media markets that are all very separate from each other. We have more people in DFW than in all of Arizona. We have 3 times as many people as Michigan. And so it's an incredibly large state to get known in and to also deliver a message in. And what I know is that Texans are ready to turn the page from Ted Cruz. We have to make sure that they know who I am, that I was, raised by a single mother in Dallas. I played football at Baylor and was captain of the team and made it to the NFL. I became a lawyer, served in Congress as the most bipartisan Texan in Congress, and that I want to serve all of us in the Senate in the exact opposite way that Ted Cruz has by not pitting us against each other or abandoning us when we need it most. And so that's a story that we know is a winning story, but we are closing that information gap of Texans knowing that every single day. Because, as many folks will probably know, for working folks across Texas or any other state, they start paying attention to elections later into the process. And this is the time when they're paying attention. And so this is the time also where the resources really matter. And so I hope folks will consider going to colinallred.com and supporting us and helping us get over that final line. Because beating Ted Cruz will be a big deal for us in Texas. It'll be a big deal nationally. But I think it also will make it for a better Republican Party coming out of this once we beat him.
You had alluded to the fact that you beat Pete Sessions in 2018. He had served in Congress for well over a decade. So you got your start in Congress by unseating a Republican in a race that you weren't supposed to win. What lessons can you take from that race and bring into this one?
Well, it's such a good point because there are a lot of similarities. Somebody who had probably had gotten a little lazy, a little out of touch, didn't care as much.
Yeah.
Sounds familiar, right? But he was somebody who nobody thought could be beaten. In fact, he was unopposed the previous election. There was no Democrat who ran against him. And this is not one of the races that folks thought that we would win. And like I said, we beat him pretty handily. But we did it by building a coalition. And that's what we're doing here, too. Of Democrats, yes, of course, and trying to increase turnout among Democrats. And Texas has been largely a non-voting state. But also, reaching across the aisle and winning among independents and Republicans. There are a lot of folks who voted for George W. Bush who voted me into Congress and who have been some of my biggest supporters. And they haven't really changed. They've seen the Republican Party change away from them.
Right.
And I think in many cases, they're looking for a coalition that they can join. And that's why when Liz Cheney comes to Texas and is campaigning with me in Dallas, that matters. Or Adam Kinzinger, who's a friend of mine, who's a Texan now and who's co-chairing our Republicans for Allred effort. Or a really well-respected local leader here, Glenn Whitley, who was the chief executive. We call them county judges, but was the executive of our county, of Tarrant County, where Fort Worth is, one of our biggest purple counties in the state, who for 30 years served that county as a Republican, has endorsed me and campaigning with me. These things matter because this is the same coalition that I think can also bring our state back to some sanity.
Now, switching gears just a little bit here, the hurricanes that are battering the Southeast right now kind of bring into focus the fact that Texas also has dealt with a raft of extreme weather events recently. Yep. Ted Cruz famously opted to skip town during a freeze that chilled the entire state, heading out to the Ritz-Carlton in Cancun, which he ultimately blamed on his daughter. Seeing the devastation wrought onto Americans in the wake of Hurricane Helene and then Hurricane Milton, what does it say about Cruz that this guy's gut reaction was just to skip town for a 5-star hotel?
That's right. Well, what we're seeing is, of course, horrific. And my prayers are with the folks in North Carolina and Florida, all the impacted areas. What was happening in Texas at that time was so much worse than a freeze. And I think that folks might not remember how bad it was here. The power was out almost statewide. And many cities were under boil water advisories because the water plants were out. And so you had to boil your water before you could even drink it. And it was for multiple days and nearly a week without power in the energy capital of the world, while it was also freezing outside.
Yeah.
And, hundreds of Texans died. This was the single biggest insurance event in Texas history because so many pipes burst and then flooded homes, and so much damage was done across the state. But there's very few things. In fact, in my life, I've never known of any weather event that hit the entire state of Texas at once, the way this did. If you can imagine having the privilege and the responsibility of representing 30 million Texans, and when this kind of a horrific storm hits, where these things are happening, where people are burning whatever wooden objects they can find to stay warm, and you think to yourself, I wonder if this is a good time to go to Cancun on vacation. I mean, it just wouldn't occur to any normal person. It wouldn't, it just wouldn't, because you would think, I have to act, I have to help. Normal people think this, much less somebody who is a United States senator. And the only reason he came back, or that anyone knew about it, is because it was posted on the internet by folks who saw him in the airport and who could not believe. In fact, I think they posted him on their flight. They're like, I can't believe he's going to Cancun during this. That's the only reason. And then, like you said, to come back and to blame your children for it is cowardly in the least, right? Yeah. But it's a perfect example of how he sees the job, which is that if it's not about him, if it's not getting him attention, if it's not getting him, some whatever he's searching for, then he's not interested.
Right. It's just like Donald Trump in the sense that he is there to serve himself and his brand, and views the people of Texas as a way to serve him, basically, not to have him serve them. With that said, how are you reaching out to the Latino population in Texas? Obviously, there have been issues with Democrats in the Rio Grande Valley, for example. How do you stop the momentum continuing to go in Republicans' direction in a place like the Rio Grande Valley?
Yeah, well, my family's from the Rio Grande Valley, from Brownsville, and spent a lot of my childhood there. And so we have a personal connection to it that I think is important. But listen, we're meeting folks where they are, and we're communicating, both in English and in Spanish. But we're also talking about the issues that really matter to folks in the Valley and to Latinos across Texas. And I think that in some ways, at times, Democrats have gotten on the wrong side of really important economic issues that matter. And we have made sure not only that Latinos know that that's not who I am, but that they know that I'm going to make sure we invest in our economy, in opportunity, and the right to retire with dignity. And this is our largest, group in the state of Texas. It's part of our, our diversity is part of our strength. I embrace that. I think it's what makes us so strong. And it's also going to, I think, help us deliver a coalition to elect a United States senator that can then bring our entire state together around our shared values.
And we're going to go finish off here with something a little bit different. I'm assuming because you live in Dallas that you are a Cowboys fan. Is that correct?
Well, I played in the NFL. So when you play against the Cowboys, it always changes. I grew up a huge Cowboys fan, though. Okay. Yeah.
Well, as a fellow NFC East guy, because I grew up in Jersey, so I'm a Giants fan, are the Commanders actually the real, are these guys the real deal? Are the Commanders now the best team in the NFC East? Is this legit? What's happening here?
Are they the best team? No. I think the Eagles are still probably the best team in the NFC East, even though they're not playing like it. They have a young quarterback and a new coach. And I think they're getting a bounce from that. But they've got, I don't think they're the best team. I think, actually, I think the Giants are playing better and the Cowboys are playing better. And so, in a lot of ways, it's going to be a very competitive division.
I had watched videos in the past and like the recent past of what it looks like when these guys would get hit 5-10 years ago, as opposed to the protection that they have today. Like, what do you like? When did you leave the NFL?
Yeah, so my last year was in 2010.
In 2010. So, I mean, the videos that we see, like in these throwbacks to how hard these guys were getting hit and how these hits were all legal, what do you think when you look back today, where it seems almost insane when I watch this and realize like how hard these guys were getting hit, helmet to helmet, versus obviously the necessary protections that are put in place for today.
Yeah, that's right. The game has changed for the good in that regard. When I was playing, a receiver coming across the middle was pretty much fair game. And, that was one of the things that happened a lot. I played special teams, and we used to do, kickoff was very different back then. They would set up a 4-man wedge, and I'd run into the wedge, and, you'd have to try and make the tackle. Yeah. None of that happens anymore. I think one of the biggest changes has been the way they're training. particularly with these guardian caps that they're putting on in training camp, because the more we've learned is that it's oftentimes not even the biggest hits, it's also the repetitive hits. And that's where practice and all the hits that pile up in practice and over training camp and over the summer can really add up. And when you make those much safer interactions, then I think you make the entire game safer. And I think this is really important for football because in a lot of ways, for youth football, it'll follow this trend. And I think that to me, football will help make me who I am. I was captain of the team at Baylor. I learned a lot about commitment from my football career, discipline, leadership, determination. These are all great qualities, but you want to do it as safely as possible. And I think we've arrived at a much better place on that.
Again, your website for people who are looking to donate?
Yeah, please go to colinallred.com. You can also sign up to volunteer with us, particularly to our Texans. You can knock on doors, make phone calls, help us get out the vote.
All right. Well, thank you for taking the time today, and best of luck on the campaign trail.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate you.